Welcome to the podcast, Scott Lewis. Today we're here to talk about Canto, the DEX that you've built with an EVM execution layer on top of the Cosmos stack. Tell me about your story. How'd you get into crypto?
Kind of fell down the Ethereum rabbit hole in late 2016. And then I've been a trader, traditional finance, for 11 years before that. And then kind of first half of 2017 went like from just reading about it to stop trading traditional financial products, focus exclusively on Ethereum. Well, actually all crypto really at that point. Started working on building stuff kind of like later in 2017. Started off with like a site, kind of like a public service site, trying to like research ICO scams. Once ICOs started dying down, we started experimenting with different stuff. We worked on launching different stuff like Slingshot, which is like a DEX aggregator, Code Arena, which is like a competitive audit game. Started designing Canto over that period, and then starting in like February of 2021, started talking to some people that wanted to contribute to building it.
Why don't you give us a high-level intro?
Canto is a layer 1 Cosmos SDK based chain. First of all, I'm not an engineer. I just did the mechanism design for it. But the protocol layer itself is a fork of the Evmos code base, which is the EVM wrapped inside Tendermint proof of stake. And then kind of where Canto goes from that is we sort of have viewed the monopolization of the application layer on Ethereum, and also looking at kind of how hard it is for a lot of the protocols that live on the application layer to be economically sustainable, especially economic sustainability without token games. And so we kind of had an idea if we kind of have the protocol and the project extend a bit up into the application layer, and have kind of free public infrastructure running on the application layer. To that end, with the launch, there were 3 DeFi primitives that were launched alongside the protocol layer. The first of which is Canto Lending Market, which is a fork of Compound V2. Second of which is the Canto DEX, which is a fork of Solidly. And then the third is an original unit of account token called Note, which is overcollateralized and uses interest rates and lending kind of in the spirit of DAI, but working a bit differently to hopefully serve as a unit of account money on Canto. And then there was a last original work went into the launch, was a governance shuttle that let the Cosmos SDK DAO control the free public infrastructure on the protocol layer. And so it's kind of the combination of that is what made up the Canto launch. And there's no team on Canto. There's no sort of organization responsible for Canto. It's just sort of like a group of contributors coordinating to build what we launched. And then some of those contributors have decided to continue contributing, and others have not. And both are okay. Kind of both in the spirit of Canto.
There's a couple of things to unpack there. Like most notably is that you call Note a unit of account. To me, that's very deliberate because it clearly is supposed to act as some kind of stable token. But no.
Yes. Well, it is very deliberate in that the same way dollars or euro or yen is a unit of account that we use as a currency, Note aspires to be that. I do not use the word stablecoin because I think it's important to make clear that there is no special mechanism to make Note mintable or redeemable for $1. And
Right.
if you look at the way Note trades in the market, you can see it's not like pegged at $1 like USDC or like USDT.
It's not attempting to peg to anything, is it? Other than
No,
itself?
I would say it's unpegged. I would say that if the mechanism works correctly, its value is currently parameterized to sort of be co-integrated with the dollar. In that, like, if it falls below $1, interest rates would increase. And when it's above the dollar, interest rates fall. You could kind of see that pattern in other currencies that are used of account, unit of account around the world. Like if the currency is too weak, the central bank might raise the interest rate. If the currency is too strong, the central bank might lower the interest rate. And so it's kind of in that spirit. Like I would think of it as just its own currency.
There's three properties that defines money. So there's unit of account, medium of exchange, and store of value. And it's interesting that you say, well, we don't promise that it has any of the other two. It's just a unit of account. And I think that fundamentally, because of the constraints of what blockchains offer, you can't have all three properties in one single token.
I would agree with that. I might think of like if Canto did have a store of value, I might think of that as Canto. I think one thing we've seen as people are actually doing real commerce and real transactions on Ethereum, you see some transactions use ETH as medium of exchange, like NFTs market uses ETH as medium of exchange. I think if you think about why that's the case, the value of ETH is more correlated with the value of NFTs, and so it makes more sense to use it as a medium of exchange. But then you also see other places on Ethereum where people are using USDC as a medium of exchange. Like if you're doing a seed round and you're settling it on Ethereum, people are settling seed rounds in USDC and not ETH because that's closer. It has USDC is much more closer to the dollar value of the startup, so they're trying to replicate. And so it's sort of like trying to solve kind of both of those like ways people are using money, but have both forms be decentralized.
I think of Bitcoin as the store of value, and then ETH as the medium of exchange for a lot of the like decentralized assets in the market, like NFTs, and then USDC or something like that as unit of account.
I think that's reasonable. I might slightly pivot off that, and I think the Bitcoin community has a lot of problems they need to solve, or maybe they need to be aware of the problems they have for that to be a long-term sustainable stance. But I would agree that's the goal of Bitcoin.
I mean, we could have an entirely like other 2-hour long offshoot just to talk about that.
I think proof of stake is a great technology, and Bitcoin community would behoove themselves to consider.
Oh my goodness! Wow, you and I would disagree so hard. ETH is already on proof of stake, and so we'll see how that experiment pans out for it.
Yeah, right. I think it'll go well, but we'll see.
That breaks down Note, but you mentioned Canto might be the store of value. So Canto is not only the DEX, but a token.
Well, so because the Canto DEX is kind of one of the aspects of free public infrastructure. Like Uniswap is like a app on the application layer, but Uniswap v2 and v3 have a fee switch. Uniswap v1 did not. Canto DEX itself is kind of like in a similar economic space as Uniswap v1, in that it's deployed on the Ethereum virtual machine that lives inside of Canto. But the blocks of Canto are validated by stakers and or by validators, and people that hold Canto can delegate their Canto to validators, like on Hub.
Sounds like the way to govern this entire protocol is through Canto itself.
Yes. Something like Canto DEX does not actually have governance parameters. It's just kind of immutably on-chain forever. Keys thrown away. But something like Canto Lending Market, where you would have to have lending parameters updated over time, the Canto DEX or the Canto DAO governance decisions would be able to update and change those.
How are changes made to the Note interest rates?
It's automated. If Note is trading above $1, the interest rate will go down. It's set to 6-hour intervals right now. So so it's parameterized so that if Note were to be 1% over $1, the interest rate would go down 1% every 24 hours in like 6-hour chunks. If Note were to fall to 99 cents, then the interest rate on Note in Canto Lending Market would go up by kind of 1% each day as long as it's at 99 cents.
Mm-hmm. Is there no time constraint for the protocol to allow people to funnel their money into the protocol to make it go back up to the dollar if it were below?
It remains to be seen whether this will adequately incentivize people, because it hasn't really been tested at scale in production yet. And so, like Canto's still at a stage where it's still very experimental and risky. But if Note fell to 99 cents, each day is at 99 cents, the interest rate would go up by 1%. And so for after 10 days, assuming it was hypothetically at 10%, hopefully that interest rate would incentivize people to bridge over other assets, buy Note with those assets, and then collect that 10%.
I mean, what is the worst that could happen? This is clearly not like, it's not UST, where people are putting their life savings in this thing, right? You're clearly marketing this thing as like, look, it's experimental. I'm not going to give you like 20% APR.
No. So all of the Note is the way the Note is created is you sort of you put down collateral in Canto lending market, and then you can borrow Note against the collateral. So if you bridged 2,000 USDC to Canto, and then you borrowed 1,000 Note, the protocol would actually mint. Well, it's a little more complicated, but a simple way to explain it: the protocol would mint the Note for you at that moment.
Yeah. So instead of putting in 2,000 USDC and taking out $1,000 worth of like ETH, the intermediary base token would be no, and then I could take no and then borrow ETH or whatever it is I want from your lending market.
It's actually all the collateral is netted together. That's how like MakerDAO works, where you have your CDP, and then or your vault now, and you kind of mint DAI against it and borrow it. This more takes kind of like a compound, or it literally takes compound. And so if you had like some USDT, some USDC, you would have this much like credit for your collateral, and then you could mint and borrow Note against that.
Yeah. Okay.
We currently have collateral factors for volatile assets at 0 because it's still kind of like very early and dangerous, but we do plan to like raise those. So like hopefully down the road, if you had ETH or Canto in the lending market, that would also count as some collateral to take out Note.
When you say it's like a CDP, but now called Vault, is that just a semantic difference?
Well, just MakerDAO, early MakerDAO called debt positions CDPs, collateral debt positions, but then they changed the term.
Just change
later.
it to vaults now?
I still call them CDPs in my head. It's just me.
Okay, well, the fundamentals don't change.
Yeah,
in
no.
that you're using real assets and then collateralizing that with the product with the lender, and then you just borrow a debt instrument like no.
Yeah.
I think we've covered a lot of the high level stuff. Maybe we could talk about the philosophy and like your background, because it sounds opinionated. This stuff should be free infrastructure, this, right? Like, how do you incentivize, yourself, your team? Is there like rev share in some way?
Incentivizations in team maybe as first. The people currently working on Canto are like not all people on my team. For pre-launch contributors, which includes like Plex, which I'd say did more work than anyone else. It's just like its own development shop. And then like Neobase, which did some pre-launch work and has also been working on different things post-launch, just a group of engineers. And kind of like the spirit of Canto is, I think when you think about the original Bitcoin launch, it's just like code released, thoughts posted in a message board. And like Satoshi originally just wanted like a Unicode character to represent Bitcoin, and then like someone later convinced them to like use kind of that orange bee we see now. It was very much like a low fidelity, like we'll just put this out here kind of launch. And then as you saw, token sales becoming more popular. The Ethereum presale had a lot more like productions. It resulted in the formation of the Ethereum Foundation. But then I think as you've seen like other projects after Ethereum, especially the ones building in like EVM chains or like Solana, you
Come
see
out
you
here.
you think like you see like more corporatization of the
Uh-huh.
deployment and
Yeah,
production and
absolutely.
marketing of a blockchain, and like
More VC chains.
your words, sure. But if you look at like the only like the three like I would say the most successful communities in the space, or like the most engaged communities in the space, like I think that's Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Cosmos. And
Yeah.
if you look at all three of those are also like the least corporate. And I
Hmm.
don't think that's a coincidence, because I think when the corporations think about converting people and like they view their users as customers, like you lose a lot
Like
of the,
unstoppable domains.
and so like, but you lose that like collectivism and voluntary like spirit, voluntarist like ideas that make things actually lendy. Like
Hmm.
blockchains aren't businesses.
Right.
They can have things in common with businesses, but when you start thinking about them as businesses, like you're just like, I don't. I mean, it's not like what I'm into, but I'm also like less bullish on their success. Um, and so like with Canto, we were really try to do a lot of things in like not in like ways that aren't consensus or conventional wisdom, because we kind of like want to draw a firm line like in the sand that like
Lead
there's
by
no
example.
business to like make number go up for you. Like you're not
Hmm.
like there's no cheer like being the Cantor community, like we don't want like cheerleaders,
Hmm.
you know.
Hmm.
Um and I think to do that you have to like do things maybe do things differently, but maybe the way things have been done before the space was as big as it is now.
Yeah, here's the thing, when it was the peak of 2021 and, all of the corporate VC backed coins were just pumping harder than anything else with better fundamentals, including Cosmos and a lot of the projects that I like. It's like frustrating to see because I'm like, oh, wait, this is where the space is headed. So what you have to
Yeah,
do is like give VCs like 2% of your float in order for them to like give a shit about this project and for them to like pump the crap out of it and
yeah,
then just
like
like automatically get exchange listings.
I think like the frustration, or at least the frustration I think in that same vein that I felt, is you see like kind of like the people that don't actually care about the space,
Yeah.
appropriating the
The
patterns of
whole
the
movement.
space.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
And
I
just like
mean, like
extracting maximum value out of it.
yeah, like I've always been a name face, but like the anon movement in crypto is very strong, and so you saw um, chains that will not be named and trading firms slash exchanges that will not be named spin up stables of anons to launch shitcoins,
Hmm.
right? The shitcoin's goal is to create the appearance of adoption, to hoodwink the members of the public
Hmm.
to put their money into the L1 shitcoin associated with the on-chain shitcoins. And
Hmm.
like that hustle worked very well. And I think now we're seeing kind of like a washing away of that tide. And hopefully more people in the space develop the awareness about the difference between like the native grassroots community building things and the suits that try to appear as if they are the native grassroots community building things. And so like I think for like these are like kind of one of the reasons why I hate it when there's a lot of strife amongst teams in the grassroots side,
Hmm.
because like honestly no native team's success is going to like destroy your ability to succeed, but the appropriation and like the co-opting of the movement will actually threaten you. And like we are literally seeing that threat right now, as like in American governance, the like crimes of Sam are putting the actual movement at risk. And so like, yeah, I don't know. I think it's like time to treat grassroots projects differently.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. Here's the thing: as a space, we need to push back against that, right? Because to what extent is Sam's actions not a false flag? Like, what if he were actually a tool of the state? Right? He rose to prominence literally overnight. None of us knew him before what, like 2017. Like the people who have been in the space for much longer than that. And so he just like came up out of nowhere and then failed spectacularly. And then suddenly it allows members of the state to say, okay, well, we need to regulate decentralized protocols the way we regulate centralized exchanges. And here's why, because consumer
Yeah.
protection.
I see Sam more as a figure that understood what people needed him to be to open the doors for him to win the game. He had no scruples about different things he did. I think we got like pretty lucky that it happened now, and that like the bank that he was not able to put all the money back in time. We like can build from where we are now.
Had the state been involved in our space the way they had been involved in Wall Street, those $10 billion lost would have been socialized to the taxpayer. And then the state would have bailed FTX out and that hole would have been plugged. That's just how ridiculous the 2008 financial crisis was. People who had no involvement in the crypto space or did nothing of their own to speculate in the space had to pay for Sam's misdeeds.
Let me unpack that a little bit. So I think you have two decisions. You have one decision, like, do we want to keep the global financial system running on opaque and like private by default for big institutions, our balance sheets hidden until regulators pry them away from people? Do we want this system, this like kind of gated, inefficient system, controlled essentially by DC in America to like run the global financial system? And I think when you have that system functioning as poorly as it does, you end up with large systemic risks like created the financial crisis. I was like trading through that. And personally, I think once you get to a point where everything is effed, I sort of wonder what the collapse would be had there not been a bailout, and like how much electricity and stuff would we have today if there hadn't been a bailout at that point in time. But what I see kind of DeFi and blockchains being able to do is to have systems that are like always available to be audited by all market participants in real time. Just like nobody knew all the crazy derivatives that like AIG had sold. And when they found out, it was like game over. And no one knew, that Sam was taking user deposits from FTX, moving them to Alameda, and then making personal loans to himself. These are the types of things that create massive like market failures. When you look at Uniswap, like the AMM has all the assets because you can see it on chain. The very block that like Aave gets 1.4 million in bad debt from Avi Eisen's little games, right? It. And so it's public. And so once things start to get in trouble, everyone can see it. Then different actors have to like get risk back under control. But that doesn't happen with Bear Stearns. It doesn't happen in the financial crisis. And it doesn't happen in FTX. And, there's like 10 other crazy crises like that in the 20th century. But then like if you go back to the 19th century, like boom and bust cycles were happening like every 3 years. Like it was absolutely nuts. As humans, we can realize that like, hey, maybe the financial systems as they exist today and as they're regulated today are not the best they could be. Maybe having instant auditability of like key like financial facilities is actually really good. And like I think that's sort of like a responsibility that like natives and people from the grassroots in the space have to build those things and to show they can work. And like in a sense, I feel like Ethereum is a lot of that. Me like contributing to Canto is, I hope, part of that too.
You and Eric Voorhees and a lot of people who agree with this are like of the same mind that DeFi is already self-regulated and completely auditable. But to those people who don't understand the value of transparency and auditability, who will come in and say, well, what about the hundreds of millions of dollars in like bridge hacks and like, smart contract exploits and all of that? How do you like protect people from losing monies from that.
Corey's and I do agree on a lot. One thing where we would branch off a bit is I would favor regulations of DeFi, but I think it's incredibly important that the regulations are like DeFi coherent. One thing that's like seems fairly obvious, the liability for deploying a DeFi contract that has not been audited should be different than the liability for deploying a DeFi contract that should be audited, that was audited. Like this is just like a basic standard. Like don't deploy things that are going to take other people's money if you haven't gotten an audit. I think that's something that has not always been followed.
But what about the ones that have been audited but didn't heed the audits fixtures?
Yeah, like I think if you're looking at like something like Harmony, where the multi-sig got compromised, do you also want disclosures about security practices? Are probably something that should be done. If you're holding user money in a custodial way, what you're actually doing and how the multi-sig is set up, getting someone to review and audit the OPSEC is probably important. And I think like if you're looking at the Ronin hack, Bridge hack, and the Harmony one, that seems like some pretty common sense things we're missing.
Balaji had come up with a solution for our space without requiring regulators. If we could parameterize the sorts of things that you mentioned, like, you know, is it open source? Is this contract on like a 2 of 3 multi-sig? Or, you know, like, you know, what multi-sig solution? Or, you know, is it arguably more distributed than that? Has it been audited? Things like that.
Yeah.
And create like a cloud regulator to crowdsource this information about each protocol.
Yeah, I think like if you look at like how FINRA works with kind of the CFTC or SEC, FINRA is industry run and like private, but maybe quasi-public. When you register as a broker deal with FINRA, the actual people that work at FINRA decide the rules of FINRA, but then the SEC requires that you are like registered in good standing with FINRA. And so I do think that like if there was good crypto native self-regulatory organization, we're talking about things that like we should, or we mainly already do demand of projects, and we should be holding projects to these standards anyway. But having self-regulation, but then that self-regulation be given more teeth by the state, I think is like a pretty reasonable approach.
I think we're all arriving at a similar conclusion in that, you know, like we as crypto natives need to be proactive and come up with solutions to self-regulate the space that we're in the decentralized space. And the regulators in meat space need to like follow in our footsteps. Like they need to take a note from us, the people who are most capable of understanding these protocols. And then
I think that would be good. I think unfortunately the following in the footsteps was following Sam's footsteps over the course of 2022. And then he rugged us by trying to get DeFi banned.
Regulators and crypto natives are like water and oil. But, you know, Sam was like an exception who was voluntarily there.
He is like living part-time in DC apparently.
I think there is value to some of us getting our foot in the door.
I recognize that like a lot of regulators are trying to like do the best job they can. I would say that you clearly like exclude some regulators like Gary Gensler from that list. I do think there are people that are in DC that do know regulators, but are also kind of aligned with the values. There's a lot more people with a lot more opinions in DC than there were just 2 months ago.
So in the bull market, people were asking me, oh, how can I buy Bitcoin? You know, how can I buy ETH? Should I buy Doge? Same people. Now, a year later, they're like, oh yeah, I told you it was a scam. It's all a scam, by the way.
That type of behavior is why the space is so cyclical.
Here was another thing that I found about grassroots projects. In the backdrop of a bull market, when you need integrations the most, the integrators are trying to sell to the highest bidder, not necessarily by the merit of the project. What's another grassroots project that you could think of lately?
Canto approach integrations is kind of like we don't care.
Yeah, you're a DEX.
Yeah, well,
You just like standalone thing.
No. I mean, it's like
ramps.
general EVM. I mean, we have a bridge with Gravity Bridge. People can get assets there. But like I think a lot of projects maybe might focus too much on getting integrations for their own purposes.
You need like exchange listings to get liquidity, but if you're a
I mean,
DEX,
I don't
you're
care. You don't need to be on Binance. If there's an exchange that like wants to do Canto on their own, like they can have they'll get questions answered just like anyone else that wants to like work on Canto. But the one thing that I think maybe projects or maybe that's not consensus opinion is that like the long-term viability of a project is highly determined by the concentration of engaged individuals in the token ledger.
Mhm.
And if you have like someone that's working on a project and they own the tokens on chain native, and they send their tokens to Binance and sell to someone on Binance, that person that buys it on Binance, some of those people obviously are natives too, and will withdraw them and get back on chain doing things, contributing to the project. Many of them are just passives. And if
Yeah.
you have someone that's committed to the project, sell to someone that's like not doing anything and not even that engaged or not even talking about it, like your project just like lost some of its like juice. If Canto is like that important that these places just want to list them on their own, that's fine. Like be nice and welcoming to everyone, but don't actually spend time trying to get that things because it's marginal or maybe it like it's a little bit negative. Like just focus on building and making things that are like cool enough that people want to come to be a part of it
Mhm.
and actually be active.
All right. So, what was missing in the market that drove you guys to build Canto? Because it's like DEXs exist.
They do. Um, I
Like,
think
why
if
did you want to solve this problem?
um, well, I think it's possible if you look at like how much like it's not exactly revenue, but if you look at how much people spend on transactions to like interact on Ethereum, it's like a lot of money. Um, and then you look at all these like amazing applications on and protocols people have built on the application layer, and it's kind of like Uniswap DAO has like never made a single dime, right? And a lot of projects like are in even worse situations like that when you count token issuance. And like it's not like it's like what could you do? What could it be like if you stop thinking about blockchains as like software platforms and you more started thinking about them as like cities, where cities are kind of like a mix of like private enterprise but also free public infrastructure. And so we sort of like thought about, hey, what if we had a DEX with zero LP fees and we just made the liquidity in that DEX a free public good that was incentivized by the city. And that's sort of like the vision for Canto DEX, and that there's no protocol fee, but there's also no LP fees. And like, can we have like a more efficient and cheaper financial system that makes other protocol builders and other users want to come to Canto to build next to that?
The analogy that we or like Sunny used to make with Ethereum is that Ethereum's like New York City. It's a metropolis. It's got everything in this one like big packed city, and there's like a lot of traffic jams and stuff. And you gotta like pay expensive toll for like the toll roads or whatever. And then Cosmos would be like little colonies or maybe little tribes at that point when the metaphor is being made.
Yeah, we're like kind of, I would say this is like where you probably notice like uh Canto's more like as people.
Yeah.
I think in some ways like we more are looking at kind of to have a different vision for what that blockchain city looks like. And I would like say if I'm like going a little further with Sunny's analogy, I might say that like Ethereum is a bit like New York City, but if there was no subway and like if there were no Central Park and if everything
Mm,
was private, I mean everything but the WETH contract
yeah.
is private. And then Canto is trying to strike a different balance. The wrapped Canto contract is public, but also the lending market and also the DEX, and also Note. Also contract secured revenue,
Yeah.
which will be coming out next.
I first met Virgil Griffith in 2015. He had like popped into like my little outpost in Bali, kept being friends with him, and we were messaging over Telegram. And then, he told me he was going to North Korea, and I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. Like, he was telling me, all of his research into successfully communist-led nations. So he had like this morbid fascination with those communities. The rest is history. But what I noticed all throughout last year was so many North Korean hackers, they just like extracting maximum value out of this space. And I was like, I can't help but think, thanks, Virgil.
No comment.
Virgil.